Go. All right, we're recording, and we will convene the meeting. Good evening. Welcome to our council meeting. It is Tuesday, February 6th. Welcome to Freeport Town Council Chambers. Tonight is meeting number 03-24, and let's find out who's here before we get started. Councilor Pillsbury had a last-minute conflict and will be here about an hour to an hour and 15 minutes after we start, but he will make it. Councilor Fournier.
Here.
Councilor Lawrence.
Here.
Councilor Benoit.
Here.
Councilor Smith.
Present.
Councilor Pilch.
Here.
And the chair, John Egan, is here. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, so welcome to those gathered here, and if you're watching, we have a couple of public hearings this evening, and we're going to set a public hearing, and then we've got some routine renewals of licenses and permits to go through, so a relatively light agenda, but before we get to that, we'll take a look at the minutes and entertain a motion to waive the reading of the minutes.
So moved.
Second. Any questions about, we had two sets of minutes because we had a 6-minute meeting on the regular Tuesday in January, and then because of the snowstorm, we pushed that a week from the 16th to the 23rd. So thanks, Chris, for getting both of those out. Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor of adopting the minutes as presented?
Aye.
Motion carries 6-0. Third order of business is announcements. I have a short one here to start with. The library has a full slate of programming in February, including a life-size Candyland game during school vacation week coming up in 2 weeks. Please visit our website, Facebook page, or stop by the library for details. Tax season is here, and the library can help. Several tax forms are available at the library front desk, and staff are happy to help you locate additional forms, instructions, and tax help. Please stop by or visit freeportlibrary.com/taxforms. Also, please participate in Freeport Community Library's Building Use Survey. Your feedback will help us better understand how the community utilizes the library building and what we should consider when planning for future renovations. Your input is invaluable in improving our services, and we thank you for taking the time to participate in our survey. You can get started at the library's website, or if you prefer to fill out a printed survey form, copies are available at the library in the lobby. And as a reminder, absentee ballots are available for the March 5th presidential primary election. Please contact the clerk's office at Town Hall for details. Those absentee ballots are available now. Hard to imagine, the library's almost 30 years old already. Anyway, so if you have ideas or good things to say about our library and how it might be used, please stop by and tell them. They're looking to get some input from the users. Other announcements? Councilor Lawrence.
Yep, the Freeport Players Annual Meeting, business meeting is tomorrow night. It was supposed to be after the meeting last week or last time, but because of the snowstorm, it wasn't. It's potluck dinner, starts at 6, business will go on at 7, and it should be a good time. Seriously, a good time.
Where does it help, Chip?
It's at the library.
At the library.
At the library at 6
Just
p.m.
all over the announcements tonight.
Yeah.
Great. Other announcements?
It's potluck, so bring something to share.
There we go. Okay. Our next order is information exchange. This is a chance for counselors to share feedback from the community and also updates on committee work in between meetings. So since our last couple of meetings in January, updates on committee work, information exchange items to share. All right. No need to linger. We'll blitz right through and get to our town manager's report. Sophie.
You are blitzing right through. I'm impressed. Well, the good news is that revenue sharing estimates for FY25 have been posted. It's my favorite day of the year. Some people like the NFL draft. I happen to like the day that revenue sharing gets posted. So the good news is that the entire pot grew. The not so great news is that we are going to lose about $1,000. So the great news is it's only $1,000. So they are anticipating that we'll still receive about $1.2 million. So that is good news for us. I also had a question from a counselor about the ARPA money, looking for an update. What I'd like to do is give you just big numbers right now. I do have a report that is sitting on the copier, so I'm hoping perhaps Caroline might be able to run and grab that, or somebody. Oh, Jessica is going to go do that. So what you'll see on that report is that we were initially allocated $904,910.16. The council actions have encumbered $846,873.30, which leaves $58,036.86 remaining. Of the money that has been encumbered, there's still $371,723.12 that has not actually been spent. So as we get closer to the end of this fiscal year, I think we're going to want to kind of go back through what has been encumbered and understand if there is a plan for it to be expended, if it was a great idea that we didn't end up
September
meeting.
30th of this year is the,
That's
that's
when
the
they have to be,
encumbrance,
have,
right?
have to be encumbered by.
what, 2 years out is the
Yep.
spending deadline?
Yep. So we have that. The other thing I thought council would be interested in is we got our ridership information for the Downeaster, and we had about 18,000 boardings on the Downeaster at the Freeport station. And, well, we had 18,093 boardings and 18,031 people getting off the train. And I think those are pretty good numbers. They're up from 2022, and I was pleased to see that. I like people making use of Freeport. I will say that things have been very busy at Town Hall. Chris and her team are working diligently to try to get ready for the election, and I know that anytime somebody comes in wanting to be a ballot clerk, that's the one, right? Yeah, wanting to be a ballot clerk, she is so excited. She actually runs and jumps onto the table to encourage them. So if anybody would like to be a ballot clerk, please see Christine. We are starting to really make some good progress. I've been working with Adam and Earl on the front office beautification project with the goal of getting that done this construction season. Yeah, I'm putting myself out there, this construction season. And we are also, Jessica, who I think is getting your report for you, has been, I can do that. And Jessica is trying to very kindly get me through the budget, introduction to the budget process. We've started with the capital plan. And I will say it's fun to learn that Freeport is not unlike other municipalities in that it has a lot of wants and finite needs. So we are working our way through that process. And I'm really interested in starting to have some open conversation with council about what priorities are out there and how we might want to tackle that. that's all I have, unless people have questions for me.
Any questions? Darrell?
This would be new to you, Mrs. Manager, that we had a discussion about brick sidewalks. And since we're going to be getting into the budget, those are significant improvements. And we never did make a decision. One of the discussions was, could we look at off of Main Street maybe in some of the outlying areas where we put bricks down, which the cost is about 3 to 4 times that of hot top. So maybe we ought to be thinking about that, because I've had a couple of people that do a lot of walking around town said, they do get slippery and
Very slippery.
they're a tripping hazard, and they would like to see something done on that. So maybe we can refresh that and make a decision on that.
Just to follow up on that, that did come up at the last Complete Streets meeting, and Adam Bliss has done a lot of analysis of where we would next be looking to replace sidewalks and what the cost would be related to that. So I do think that's in process, and I think that's going to keep moving forward.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions for Sophie? Great, thank you. All right, our next item is for public comment period for those in the room in person here. This is a chance for you to come forward and address the council on items that are not on our agenda this evening. So if you're here for some of the public hearings or the permit renewals, those will be coming up a little bit later. But this section is for those here present to address the council about what's on your mind. So please introduce yourself, tell us where you live, and tell us what's on your mind.
Valley Sterling, 62 Pine Street, Freeport, and I'm here on behalf of the Freeport Sustainability Board, just to give a quick update of where we are at with the Climate Action Plan. Medi, our coordinator, has been very meticulously working through all of the feedback and incorporating it all in the plan. The draft of the plan will be released without appendices by the end of this week. And the next 3 weeks for our board will be dedicated to getting feedback from the public. So we're going to dedicate the bulk of our meetings to hear from residents, so that we can continue to adjust the plan according to the priorities of the public. We expect that the plan will be presented to you in the first meeting in April, which I believe is the second. And hopefully by then you will have had enough of a chance to review the plan ahead of time and be prepared to listen to the presentation and ask any questions that you may have. But if you do want to go and read the draft ahead of time, it will be posted on our website by the end of this week without the appendices. And then as we continue to refine it, the refinement will be incorporated into the plan and will be continually updated. Just to give a little background of where we were before, or by the last time we came here, we have continued to reach out to the public. We have had about 2,000 emails go to residents with information about the plan and directing them to our website to give us feedback. We have met several times with L. Bean. We have 2 workshops for businesses, one planned for this Thursday and another planned for the following Thursday. If anyone's interested, let me know and I'll send you all the information so you can attend. We're also working with the schools. The middle school is sending a quick survey to students so that we can get their, incorporate their feedback and ideas. And the high school, the Earth Club, is facilitating a workshop based on the other workshops that we've done for the public to get the ideas from the high schoolers. We've also reached out to the Freeport Housing Trust because that's a sector of the population that has been harder to reach. And we have also sent through the town, thank you so much for facilitating this, the flyer with information for every household to be informed about the plan and also to give everyone an opportunity to send their opinions either by through their website or here in Town Hall and the library. We are printing hard copies of the survey, so anyone who wants to contribute that way may do so. So I think that's about it. But if you have any questions, happy to answer.
What are the dates and times of those two presentations?
So the two presentations for the business community, the first one is this Thursday. We are collaborating with the Chamber of Commerce. It's at noon at 42 Main, which is the Chamber's office. The second one is Thursday the 15th at the Community Library. We're collaborating with Climate Works, which is an organization run by one local person, but they work statewide doing this work, which basically is facilitating discussions with businesses to try to assess and gauge the level of interest in implementing sustainable ideas into their whatever routine work.
Right, great. Yep, go ahead, Joanna.
Will there be any discussion on feedback on the Monday meeting?
This coming meeting?
On the 12th, yeah.
Yes, so that will be the first meeting that we will basically open the meeting to turn it into a quasi-public meeting. And we will be taking in feedback, but we will not be able to respond to feedback live. And that is mainly because as a board, we have to deliberate and speak in one voice, so we can't have people from the board just responding with their personal opinions to feedback that the public may present. But we will have time after the meeting and in subsequent meetings to basically mull over the feedback and incorporate what seems to be bubbling up.
I think I understand correctly as well that the Sustainability Board has also sent or plans to send the draft to the Social and Racial Equity Committee to be able to look at the draft and the plan with an equity lens, which I think is a wonderful use of the committee.
Yeah. And I do have to
Medis are-
say, oops, sorry.
Medi's been in touch, so that's in the works actively, and I appreciated that, so thank you.
Yeah, and I also want to do a shout out to Medi because she has been going to all the committee meetings for all the town committees, informing them of the plan and trying to assess where they can contribute or what it is that they want to include in the plan. And she has been just amazing how much work she's put into this plan. And I have to say, I would not be here standing today if Medi were not doing the work in the background. So thank you so much for supporting her position and for allowing her to just do this incredible work that she's doing for us.
Thank you, Valerie.
Thank you.
Anyone else, please step up.
Hi. I'm Jim de Grand Prix, and I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to offer a brief introduction of Andrew Lardy, Executive Director of Tedford Housing. So, as a de Grand Prix, I'll promise to be uncharacteristically brief. Shortages of housing became front and center for me and my older brothers, Richard and David, when we owned well over 100 low-income apartment units in southern Maine in the 1980s and the 1990s. We became keenly aware of the need for affordable housing at that time, and which of course still exists today, and also the need for other services that go hand in hand with housing insecurity. I spent 2 terms on the Preble Street Resource Center board, where I really began to learn the complexities of the homeless, and it is a challenge. I'm supporting Tedford Housing today because they are not only meeting housing needs regionally, certainly including Freeport, but also enhanced case management, which I think is a real important addition for those using and seeking their assistance. So I'd like to introduce Executive Director of Tedford Housing, who are in the midst of an effort to add desperately needed housing capacity for responding to housing insecurity and homelessness in Freeport and in our entire surrounding region. And that would be Andrew Lardy.
Thank you, Jim, and good evening, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to just share real briefly a little bit about myself and Tedford Housing. As Jim said, I'm Andrew Lardy, Executive Director. And Tedford has been around since the late 80s, but we are right now in the midst of a very profound transformation to our organization and, trying to catch up to the increasing demand that we've all been seeing for a long time. Tedford's been aware for a long time of a need to grow and expand, and right now we're about to build an expanded facility that's going to really be the most significant piece of public health infrastructure serving the southern Midcoast since the expansion of Midcoast Hospital, I think. So we've had existing really strong support from all throughout the region. We serve really everybody north of Portland and south of Rockland along the coast. And folks like Jim, and of course you might remember about 6 weeks ago, I think Willow Wright was here inviting folks to an event that we just held 2 weeks ago here in Freeport, hosted by the Freeport Lioness Lions and Freeport Community Services. Had 75 people in the room that night. And Freeport Housing Trust was there. It was a really great informational event and just showed, of course, a couple of counselors, we were grateful to see you there in the room as well, showed how much interest there is and how much passion there is for being part of the solution to this issue. So, some folks find that poverty can be a little bit hidden in communities like ours. I think Freeport and Brunswick have some things in common in that way. But last year, Tedford received, among all the hundreds and hundreds of phone calls we received of folks looking for a place to be, for some shelter, 18 of those calls were from people who said their last stable residence was Freeport. Now, I don't know if that's a big number or a small number, but it reminds us that these are our neighbors. So we are in the midst of an elaborate appeal effort across municipalities. We are talking right now with 7 different towns. We had a significant leadership gift from the town of Brunswick to kind of kick things off, $200,000 there, $50,000 in the pipeline going to a vote in Harpswell. This moment with unspent ARPA funds is really an extraordinary opportunity, a unique moment of possibility to bring this public health infrastructure online as fast as possible. And it's an extraordinary one-time request from Tedford after doing a lot with very little for decades. So I'm here tonight to request that the council consider identifying a pathway so that it could decide whether and how to join Freeport's residents and other towns in this effort. And of course, I'm happy to make a presentation anytime for anyone, happy to answer questions now or offline. I'll also, I'm skedaddling back to Maine Beer Company for my office hours that we're having right now with a bunch of folks, but I'll leave behind a little folder business card, and we're looking forward to being in touch. But if anybody has a question now, feel free.
Questions for Andrew?
I think it's important to recognize that 18 people from Freeport called, but that means there's probably plenty of more who didn't. So 18 where you think that's a lot or little, I'm sure that's just the tip of the iceberg. So.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Andrew. All right, anyone else for public comment on non-agenda items? All right, we will have our virtual public comment at the end of the agenda, just before the executive session for those online. Our next order of business is the consent agenda. This is where the start of the action items that we'll take this evening. Take action on the following items as read by the council chair: to consider action relative to adopting the February 6th, 2024 consent agenda, and that the February 6th consent agenda be adopted. The items on that are appointing some fine volunteers to our election crew, including registrar of voters and warden, and also to take action on accepting the Affordable Housing TIF report from 2 properties owned by Freeport Housing Trust, some donations, again, appointing election clerks, and donations to the Fire and Rescue Department, as well as renewing some public peddler licenses. So quite a full consent agenda, but all rather ordinary and routine. This is a point where we offer an opportunity, if councilors want to hear more, we could pull something off of this consent agenda and have it be its own action item, or we can adopt the agenda as it's presented.
I have a question about item 50-24. I don't know that it needs to be removed from the consent agenda to ask that question, or if it needs to be just in order to get more information.
So before we do that, I forgot to ask if there was a second to the motion. So we have to have it on the floor for discussion.
I'll second it.
Thank you. So you can ask a question for sure.
Okay.
And then decide if you want to recommend pulling it off the agenda.
It's probably a question for the town manager, and she may not have an answer to it. But this is related to the public peddler renewals. The two that are on this agenda are fantastic businesses, and I fully support them, and I would love to have them continue to operate exactly where they are. My question is about signage and whether, knowing that the sign ordinance is an issue that this council needs to work on resolving, based on our peddlers on public property ordinance, do we have the ability to regulate signage for those businesses under that ordinance?
So I'm going to just take a stab at this, knowing that I haven't had a chance to look at the peddlers ordinance yet. The issue with the signage ordinance is simply that we are not allowed to regulate content, and all of the old municipal sign ordinances regulated content. The Supreme Court has said that as a governmental unit, we are not allowed to look at what is on the sign, but rather the implication of the sign in terms of size, location, that kind of stuff. So my sense is if we don't regulate it within the peddler ordinance, that we probably won't be able to regulate in the regular sign ordinance, because what I have seen there, they are much more stationary signs, at least when I've been looking at the sign ordinance. So, but what I can commit to, Counselor Smith, is looking into it and giving you an answer in the weekly report.
Okay. Yeah, I don't see any need to hold up these renewals. I guess my concern that I want to share related to this is about the number and placement of temporary signs of peddlers on both public and private property, which I think that was attempted to be addressed in the sign ordinance, given all of the issues related to pandemic allowances and also the Supreme Court ruling on the sign ordinances. I think it's just one of those things that is waiting there for us to circle back and address.
Okay, any other items that weren't concerned to remove from the consent agenda? All right, the lengthy consent agenda has been moved and seconded, and we're ready to vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? 6-0. And we'll have some follow-up on the details on the sign. All right, our next item is our first public hearing this evening to consider action relative to proposed amendments to Chapter 21 regarding new cannabis business uses. So let's, Councilor Forney, could you please open the public hearing?
Certainly. We
Sorry,
had ordered,
sorry, I didn't read. I'm supposed to be the one
Yeah,
opening
you
the
are,
public
but that's
hearing,
okay.
so just move that along. So we're gonna, maybe you could read the be it ordained so that we have this context here.
fine.
Sorry about that.
So my question, are we doing the public hearing first and the ordained?
We are, we're just gonna open it with the be it ordained
Okay,
before we vote on it.
certainly. Be it ordained that proposed amendments to Chapter 21 of Freeport, the Town of Freeport zoning ordinance pertaining to new cannabis uses be enacted.
Second that.
Okay, so it's on the floor. We have a public hearing. Public hearing is now open, and those wishing to comment either for or against or just provide neutral comments about the item that is up for vote can approach the podium. Please tell us who you are and where you live, and what's on your mind about this particular item on the agenda this evening.
Good evening, council members. My name is David Stevenson. I live in Durham, Maine, and I own Hazy Hill Farm, a well-known cannabis company in Maine. Won a lot of awards over the years. I have great brand recognition, not only in Maine, but across the country. I've been growing cannabis in Freeport since 2015. And I've been petitioning this council to move forward with allowing adult use. So it's been a long road, but we've made some progress, and I definitely appreciate all your help and work to make this happen. Ironically, the adult use market is now pretty saturated, and I'm not looking to switch over anytime soon, but I do appreciate the ability, the option to. I do grow for recreational use in Portland, and will continue to grow for medical in Freeport, is the current plan. But these things do change quite a bit. There was just a few things I wanted to go over. In this, I just wanted to double check. I'm not super familiar with the zoning map. I own the property on 24 Noble Drive, and I just wanted to make sure that I was included in the zoning districts. I know you guys are showing priority for people that have already been here and been growing cannabis, so I really appreciate that. It means a lot to myself and Peter Ingram, who's the other farmer in the town. So I'm assuming, yes, that is covered. Yeah, great, thank you. You know, the other things that I wanted to mention were that there was no language in there about dispensary cultivation. There's a couple different licenses that are issued by the state, by OCP, the Office of Cannabis Policy. Caregiving licenses is the one that's been around for the longest. And then also dispensary cultivation. The wording sounds like there would be a store there. There is not. It would just be basically a larger medical facility. All caregivers are held to the same standards. They're only allowed to grow up to 30 plants or a canopy of 500 square feet. So I would be looking to apply for a dispensary license for this location. I think that the application process sounds very reasonable. You know, I believe it, the way I read it, it was within 10 days. You'll open up the application process and people can apply. Up to 4 licenses will be accepted. Again, we'll have priority because we've been here for so long. All that sounds good to me. And then we have up to a year to get the license and get it back to you. So I feel like it's a very fair timeline. I appreciate that. The only, I think, issues I had were that I'd just like to see some language in there saying that, you know, we're allowing for dispensary cultivation. Again, not looking to have a storefront, although I do believe that they should be allowed here in Freeport and would do good things for downtown. I know a lot of people, or some people, less and less all the time, you know, think that these are shady shops or anything, but I think if you would come to my store in Portland or say Fire on 4 in Portland or any of the JAR locations, you'll find that these are much nicer stores than any of the liquor stores around. So, you know, these are beautiful spaces. I spent over $500,000 in my store alone. We generate an insane amount of tax revenue for the state. It's really important, I think, for the state of Maine to acknowledge that, how much tax dollars we provide. And I hope that they continue to support our industry because we're up there with the lobster industry. I think we're beyond the lobster industry in Maine. Cannabis is a huge part of our economy, and I'm sure all of you know someone that is in the industry or, you know, uses cannabis either medically or recreationally. I hope we can continue to eliminate the negative stigma. In my view, and most of the science points to that, marijuana is, or cannabis, is, you know, much more benign than alcohol. You know, heavy alcohol use is, you know, very, you know, obviously it can be used in moderation and great, and obviously cannabis can also be abused, but typically if someone has too much cannabis, they might be, you know, eating all the food in the fridge. They're not going to go home and beat their wives or, you know, get in a car accident, drunk driving. You know, you lose a lot of common sense on alcohol, I find. But again, you know, I have an occasional drink and everything in moderation. I think can be acceptable, most things anyways. The only other thing that kind of popped up was the inspections. We're already annually inspected by the OCP. In your ordinance, it asks that, the police, the fire and rescue, the code enforcement, or any other officer can come into my facility anytime. I don't know any other business that's held to that. Seems kind of excessive. I understand you're trying to make sure everyone's safe, but again, I've been growing here since 2015, and if I wasn't regularly coming to these meetings and petitioning you all, you wouldn't know I was even here. There's been no issues with the law. Our schools, everyone's like, oh, what about the children? It's all, as long as you're a responsible adult and keeping your medicine or your cannabis locked up, just like you would your alcohol, simple stuff like that. Anyways, it just seems a little excessive, I guess, is what my point is. Maybe you could at least deem just one person to do an annual inspection, not just anyone at any point. Again, seems a little unreasonable to me, especially where we're already being inspected by the OCP at least once a year. The other thing in terms of the inspections is if you're doing inspections for all the grow facilities, there's a potential that the inspector could potentially bring in, if one farm, say, has powdery mildew, which puts spores into the air and can be, put on someone's hair or their skin or their clothes, that could get transferred to my facility. Or if they had russet mites, which are incredible pests that are actually microscopic, and you can't even see them until you have a full infestation. I just would ask that you maybe, limit it to one inspection or one cultivation facility per day so that there's not, would be an issue of cross-contamination, if that makes sense. You have questions, sir?
Yeah, go ahead, there.
Two things. Probably number one, I used to be fire chief here, and I retired before you had your operations, but I look at that as, I tend to agree with you, probably one facility. I would like to see fire inspections done, because I think we're not in looking for how you're doing your business, but maybe there's an issue that may crop up that could cause a fire, and these facilities, if a fire does occur into them, usually are a large-scale event. So I tend to agree that it should be maybe limited, but I'm not sure I'd want to eliminate it totally.
Yeah, that makes sense. The last thing I need is a fire as well. So
Exactly.
I think I could agree with you there. I don't have an issue with that. I just, it just seemed a little excessive maybe to have, I think, any officer that the town manager wanted to go into my facility could. Again, I have nothing to hide, that's fine, but maybe at the very least, please limit it to, one inspection per day, per location.
So I want to circle back to this dispensary.
Dispensary cultivation
So what,
license.
so you're growing now and you're meeting your needs with what we're doing in town. What would this add to that? I'm confused on the terminology and actually what would happen if that's allowed.
Yeah, so what would happen if that was allowed? Nothing really. It's a simpler license. You're also only allowing 4 licensees, correct? So currently, my wife and I share a garden. We're both caregivers, and we also have 2 employees that also are caregivers in that same facility. So there's 4 licenses right there. It's much easier. I'd like to get away from the multiple caregiver. It's more just easier if I just applied for a dispensary license. And that's what I'd like to do. I'd like to move forward with the dispensary license that gives you unlimited canopy, unlimited plant count, and it also encompasses, you can have 2 grow locations. I wouldn't be looking to open another one in Freeport, nor any other grow license. I have plenty, but I am still building out my facility, so I'm looking to expand in the facility. It's a 10,000 square foot warehouse, so unless I was to have multiple caregivers, which wouldn't really work with the 4 licenses, I would have to do a dispensary license. So it just makes way more sense. And actually, the security requirements are pretty much exactly the same as adult use. So I would be required to adhere to higher security requirements by the state. So it's actually better for everybody, I think.
That explains a lot. Thank you very much.
No problem. Any other questions, concerns, thoughts, prayers?
Thanks for your comments, Mr. Stevenson.
Thank you for your time. And again, thanks a lot for this. It really means a lot. It's been a long time coming, and I appreciate the support from the town. Thank you.
Anyone else wish to comment during the public hearing on this item?
Yep, we have a hand up. Peter.
Hi, this is Peter Ingram. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Hi, Peter.
Great. Thanks for having me. And thanks again. I'd like to echo what David said, and we really appreciate all the efforts that's put into these meetings, the time that you've put, the planning board's put in, the town attorneys put in. We greatly appreciate it. In addition to what David said, I would also question whether cohabitation of medical and adult use cultivation can happen in the same building. The state does allow for that, but I didn't see anything in the ordinance that would allow for that. It was the ability to do one or the other and switch between the two, which is greatly appreciated, especially echoing what David said about the changing market and how that's apt to change again and again. But my vision for my space was to be able to cultivate part of the space for the adult use market and the other part for the medical market. I have 2 stores in South Portland, one medical and one adult use, and that would make a lot of sense for what I've got going on. And I'm wondering if we can include language in the ordinance that would allow for that, or if it already exists and I just didn't catch it.
We'll get into specific comments when we have staff presentation, Peter, so we're not going to have a debate back and forth right now.
Sure.
But that's noted.
Okay, thank you so much. Really appreciate it again.
Great. Thanks for your comments. Anyone else?
I just had one quick question. Sorry, just one more quick question. I was just curious as to if you guys had been throwing around numbers as to what the application and license fees were going to be, because
Yeah, we have a
Money's tight.
proposal. We have a proposal this evening, so,
Okay, thank you.
from staff. All right.
Can I just frame?
Yeah, I just want to close the public hearing if we're done taking any testimony. I don't see any other folks moving forward, nobody else online, so we'll go ahead and close the public hearing and have the discussion at the council. And we've had the proposal read and seconded. Sophie.
I just want to frame the discussion for tonight, because while I would never tell council what it can do, well, yeah, I would, but I think it's really important just to understand that as you look at the zoning ordinance, if you make any changes to this that could be considered substantive, it has to go back through the process. So Caroline and I have been working over the last 5 weeks at doing everything in our power to make these changes that flow with the existing recommendation from the planning board. So if you're not happy with what they have here, it's perfectly fine. It just means we give it back to Caroline and she has to take it back through the process.
What is that process? What is the process?
So they would have to, you'd have to give them some guidance because they've come up with what they think is the answer. And they would take your guidance, they'd have a meeting, potentially call a public hearing at that meeting, but probably the next meeting after that when there would be some draft language.
It'll be the planning board.
At the planning board level. They would have to chew on it until they got to a place that they felt comfortable sending it back to you. So once you send it, you don't have control over how long it takes to come back. Could be a couple of months, could be several months.
just to go back to Peter's question, on page 2, it defines cannabis cultivation facility, an adult-use cannabis cultivation facility or medical cannabis facility, cultivation facility. And then the cannabis establishment explains that, and it includes adult use and that, but not retail stores. This is not what this is about. It's just a cultivation, right?
And manufacture.
Right. Daryl?
So to look on page 11, under the rights for access, we're talking inspections.
We're
If-
on zoning right now, though.
Pardon me?
You guys are on the zoning ordinance. You're talking
We
licensing.
have more paper up here.
You're
Licensing,
licensing.
this is on the licensing, isn't it, I think?
Yeah, that's actually our next item, Daryl.
That's the next, all right, I'll wait for that.
We haven't opened that
I'll
one
wait
yet
that.
for the licensing.
I'll hold on for that then, thank you.
And just about, while we're talking about the inspections as it relates to the zoning, everything that I read in here related to inspections really is the same as any other in terms of code enforcement and fire and public safety looking before a certificate of occupancy, but that doesn't preclude other inspections during business hours. But I think the concern really is on the licensing piece with the language there.
Right. So I'm particularly focused on the framing that Sophie just did, which is that if we're going to make substantive amendments to this, we take close to 3 years of progress and start the clock over again, which doesn't sound very efficient to me. So I understand that there's some considerations that these recommendations came through a public process at the planning board, which had public hearings. And so I'm expecting that, I'm supporting this, and I'm expecting that we have largely incorporated what folks that are interested in this issue are, have been presented. So it's a little frustrating, I'm sorry, Mr. Stevenson, but to hear that there's language that's not quite right after this many steps in the process. So I'm hesitant, but I'm not closed by any means, just letting you know my particular position. But I'm hesitant to open up a lot of considerations for amendments because it starts the process over again. And we have put a lot of staff time and planning board time into this. Welcome, Matt. Daryl.
I agree with you, John. My question, I guess, so if we pass the ordinance tonight and we run with it for a year or so, and if we have issues that came up, maybe in inspections or this other area, we have the opportunity, if I'm correct, to go back and actually tweak this ordinance, to maybe address that, correct?
That's correct. We can always tweak an ordinance, and it would have to, be prompted from the planning staff through the planning, just the way this arrived at our desk here today.
I tend to agree with you. I think a lot of time and thought, it may not be, 100%, but I think it's 99%, and we ought to move it.
Yeah.
Right, Chip?
I also think that the zoning is the global manufacturing. It doesn't say medical or
Right.
adult use. It just says you can grow it here, and the licensing deals with that particular question.
Right.
And it's in both. I mean, it's inherent in both, so I don't think we need to make amendments. And like any ordinance, you do one shot, and then
Yeah, see how it goes. Can I just say something? Matt, public hearing's actually closed, sir. We just had a public hearing on the first cannabis ordinance, so we're at the zoning one. That's where we are on the agenda. Dan?
I have a change to propose, but I think it's an easy one that won't require going through the process because it's just a typo. It's an easy one, yeah. Section 412 on page 22.
licensing
In
or
zoning, in zoning, yeah. It says it is the intern of this, I think it means it is the intent of this district. And I think Caroline has a presentation for us too, which I'd be eager to see.
I'm fine not doing presentations anymore. It's worked well for me so far. So we have two different things that we're going to talk about tonight, which we talked about last meeting. So we're going to talk about the zoning land use regulations, which now sound like the easier of the two. And then we're going to talk about licensing. They are intertwined and they do go hand in hand. So just keep that in mind. So the planning board, through a lot of work and leadership of Cecilia leading their discussions, has talked about cannabis for over a year. And so the council, I think, sent a recommendation to the planning board to look at cannabis land uses for manufacturing and processing only and see if they wanted to come up with language. And so they did that, and they took about a year. And so when things go through the planning board, they actually do quite a bit of notification. So we had to notify every property owner in any of these districts that we talked about by mail, and then we have a surrounding buffer. Sometimes it's up to a half a mile. So there's a lot of work and a lot of abutter notification. So this recommendation was made to you guys in 2022, but because the licensing wasn't done for various reasons, it's been collecting dust. And like you heard tonight, things are changing super fast. We learn as we go. The two go hand in hand. So at the last meeting, we reviewed the version that came out of the planning board with some changes and cleanup by staff to make the two documents talk together, and they were non-substantive. They were mostly references. So we will review that again tonight, but that's a little bit of background some of you have heard, but John hasn't heard it. He wasn't here at the last meeting, so it was worth reviewing. So do you have the remote? No, or does he not switch?
I got it.
So again, this is a planning board recommendation for the land use types. So we talked at the last meeting, but I'm still going to go through it. There's many types of cannabis under state law. We talked about there's differences with adult use and medical, there's retail stores, there's cultivation, manufacturing, and testing facilities. And then there's a couple types we need to allow kind of by right. Cannabis home cultivation, we can all grow for ourselves at our home by right. And then we have exempt caregivers. They might be people growing for, a couple family members, and they're allowed to do that. We can't regulate them. It's happening now, and it's going to continue that way. We must also allow registered caregivers. These are different than the exempt caregivers because these registered caregivers, as you learned a little bit tonight, are growing for medical cannabis. Although we can't prohibit them, we can have reasonable regulations surrounding them. We cannot cap the number of caregivers, but again, we can have reasonable regulations. So you will see in the zoning language, there's a new proposed use of medical cannabis small scale caregiver operation, which we talked about would be someone that's growing in their home. So medical cannabis small scale caregiver operations, they can be commercial and they can be non-commercial. They sell or dispense cannabis solely out of the caregiver's residential dwelling or accessory structure. So again, like any other use, we're proposing to permit this as a home occupation. They don't process or manufacture using chemicals or solvents. They don't have any more than 30 mature cannabis plants. They would come under Section 503 of the zoning ordinance, home occupations. We did have to tweak the language a little bit to go with allowances under state law. It would be allowed in all zoning districts. They would be exempt from some of the other size limitations we have for home occupations, and the regulations wouldn't allow for outdoor storage. Mr. Stevenson asked about zones. So when the planning board looked at this, they added new uses, commercial uses of cannabis cultivation facility and cannabis manufacturing and processing facility. They looked at many things, but really landed at allowing these in zoning districts as shown on the map, primarily the Route 1 corridor and a little bit down Desert Road, where manufacturing and processing was already allowed. The standards were created, so if there's an existing standard that applies to manufacturing and processing, it would also apply to one of these new cannabis types. To be clear, the new uses do not include retail stores. They don't include a medical retail store. They don't include testing facilities of either adult use, or medical. None of those are going to be permitted in Freeport. When the planning board talked about this, they did not talk about the new, what was brought up tonight, the medical dispensary cultivation. They really talked about allowing the caregivers, again, the people that are growing up to 30 plants. This new use that was brought up tonight, not a new use, but new that wasn't considered here, would not have that same limitation. My understanding is they wouldn't have the same limitations as the traditional caregivers on who they can sell to. It would be a wider audience. What we did talk about at the last meeting a little bit is that caregivers won't have retail, they won't have a storefront, but they have point of sale transactions. So if you are the registered caregiver, your patient can come to your site, you can trade funds for the product that they need to get, and we have to allow that. But again, because those are typically smaller in nature due to the plant limitations and they're providing for the patients they have, that's what the planning board was looking at. So the new 2 uses of the cannabis cultivation or cannabis manufacturing and processing facility are proposed to be new uses subject to site plan review in the zoning districts, as shown here, that already allow manufacturing and processing. So they would have to go through site plan review. There is an exemption in there. So we have 2 facilities that are existing. They legally came in under manufacturing and processing uses. These new standards would allow them to continue operations without having to come through site plan review under the new standards unless they go to make changes. If they go to make changes, then they would have to go to the project review board. So for a change, for example, to put an addition on, they would have to comply with the standards and go through review. This is not something that's set up to allow staff approval. I know we've been trying to do that for a lot of things in staff review board, but since there's been a lot of interest and this is in use, it seems like it warranted a public process. So there's a whole new section, section 535 for cannabis establishment, and these are performance standards that these new uses would have to comply with, things like signage, odor, safety, and lighting. There are some separation and buffer requirements. So as of the date when their application's deemed complete, they would need to show they comply with the 1,000-foot buffer from the lot lines of any public, private school or licensed child care facility. Again, we talked at the last meeting that the state actually would only require 500. In this case, the planning board decided to go larger. There's also a buffer that the new facility would have to be 100 feet at least from any other residential structure located on another property. In some zones where they have like a 50-foot setback, this wouldn't be a big deal, but when you get into something like C1, Route 1 South, where they have a 15-foot setback, the max you could get if everyone built to the line would be 30 feet. So this would, again, include an additional buffer for residential properties, and the ordinance lays out what is considered and what's not considered a residential property. And again, we talked about this a long time ago. So this is from 2022. We've actually been fortunate to have some daycares and schools come into town. So this is dated information, but this will just give you a sense of at that time, what some of the sensitive use buffers would look like. So if you're within the red circle, you cannot move in with a new cannabis establishment. And that's all I have for you for the zoning regulation.
Great.
I do think if you wanted to, the topic got raised tonight about whether or not that medical dispensary cultivation use be permitted. That's not something the planning board had looked at. I think based upon conversations with the town attorney, it would be considered a substantive change. So if that's something the council wanted the planning board to look at, you could send the whole thing back, or it could be something they look at later, or if it's something someone really wanted, someone could also bring in an applicant-driven agenda item as allowed under the ordinance.
Questions for Caroline? Okay. I think that's our body of information for this particular item. Any final questions or concerns before we take a vote?
I am going to propose an amendment, which I hope does not trigger a total reboot of this entire thing, but I welcome Sophie's feedback on that. I talked about this with Caroline briefly yesterday, and it does have to do with the residential setback of 100 feet. I don't think that that is enough. I did raise this with the planning board, and I know the planning board considered it. And I think the concern from the planning board was that they did not want to make this different than any other manufacturing business. And not to be discriminatory to this industry in particular, but I do think in the same way that we're already having additional setbacks regarding certain other uses like daycares and schools, I think there really needs to be an additional setback from this type of business and manufacturing from residential uses. And I say that based on my own experience, that one of the current facilities is 300 feet from my front door. And I can smell the product being manufactured in that facility everywhere on my 3/4 of an acre lot. The building itself is 100 feet from the property line. And my house is another 200 feet from the property line, and that is still not a buffer. Now, I will say that this is not a complaint. When I raised this at the planning board, I think the owner of this facility heard it as a complaint, and it is not a complaint because everything about the business is run impeccably. But even with the odor control that is written into this ordinance, which I believe is already being followed by this business, it is not able to contain the odor. So all of that is to say that I would be proposing a change to make that a 250-foot setback from residential uses.
150, 120 feet away from a residential building, so you put me out of business.
So, and I guess my question is, which would be to Caroline, which is, given the fact that there are existing businesses, that are already operating, which we're saying are not going to be impacted by this unless they're expanding. Is anybody going to be put out of business if we were to change that setback?
So we wouldn't kick them out. I would have to look at the language to see how it's written, how it would come into play if they wish to expand. When they created the 100-foot buffer, the planning board, they did look at it, and it was determined that the existing businesses do comply. One thing to be aware of is when you add that buffer, I feel like you are adding a further limitation, which is my understanding as to why the planning board stopped at 100, because in some small zones with smaller lots, like VC3 just over the railroad tracks, or even the C1, which is really narrow, or C3, I feel like you're really further limiting the use, and I don't know on the fly what the impacts of that would be. Which is okay, but be aware of it.
So the other part of that, and I sympathize with you, but if the wind's blowing from the wrong direction, it doesn't matter how far away you are from it, it's going to impact you. What is that distance? 1,000 feet, 2,000 feet before you have an issue? I mean, I lived in places where there were paper plants, so you couldn't see them. They weren't within a mile of where I lived, and yet the whole area smelled like paper. So I think I'm not in favor of changing the setback just because there's too many other variables that can still affect you. Even if you had, 250 feet, it wouldn't be enough, I don't think.
And I think that I agree with you, actually, which is why I'm not saying it should be 500 or 1,000 feet in the same way we're saying it has to be 1,000 feet from daycare. I'm not even sure that 1,000 feet makes any difference to the daycare. I guess my concern, and it is not to say that I'm not in support of these businesses still being able to operate in the town of Freeport. My concern is for these districts, many of which we've set as our target high-density housing development zones, is what is the more important use? And are we impacting negatively the ability to develop that for housing if you're also saying that you want to put these sort of manufacturing places in those same districts?
Darrell?
I guess my question is, as the technology is evolving through these businesses and through the grow practices, are we envisioning down the road something that would control orders? I don't know. But I'm sure that other places have this, not only in Freeport. You have read this in the paper where the businesses had the odor problem and some of the neighbors were complaining. So since we do have a section in this ordinance that does try to address the issue of odor, I'm not sure how robust that is, if it could be utilized to help solve the problem. Because, quite interesting, back on agricultural, certain times of the year, there's items that are put on fields for agricultural purposes that generates an odor that will travel some distance, and that's part of the business. And we try to address that. So I think you're right, Chip. I'm not sure we could change this. I think if we go back for the time that's been put in here, it may not be perfect, but at least it gives us a direction to go in, and then we can tweak that. So I'm not sure if I would support it at this point.
I will add that we don't have complaints on file, like formal complaints submitted to the code officer about odor. It doesn't mean people don't smell it. One of the two establishments, we had somebody complain verbally quite a bit, not enough that they wanted to fill out a form. They moved and we haven't heard from the new owners. So if the new owners don't live there, I don't know, or if they don't care or they like the smell, we don't know. But it's not something that we have an abundance of complaints about. But again, people might like the smell.
The manager advises that if we change the 100-foot setback, we would need to get feedback from our attorney. Dan?
I agree with Chip and Darrell. I don't know that there's a number that would be right, but I'm sensitive to the concern you're bringing up. So the way I read it under odor management, it says the odor of cannabis must not be readily detected off-site, i.e. must not be detected beyond the property line on which the use is located. And there's other language in there as well. So my sense is that if there is an issue and it became something that was offensive to a neighbor who wanted to complain, we might be able to not grant a license or not grant a renewable license until the issue is dealt with. I think that's a more effective way of regulating the problem than changing the number on a setback, which would help but probably not fix it.
Fair.
Chip?
And technology's changing all the time, so I would bet that at some point, it is not going to be an issue at all. Because the technology changes to get the odors out of the air.
Could be. So we could take a vote on an amendment if you wanted to propose one.
Doesn't sound like there's support for an amendment, so I understand that. I guess what I wanted to give voice to is the fact that I appreciate the feedback based on the technology. My skepticism based on the odor control, which I believe was intentionally put in there because of this issue, is that I believe that everything that is in here is already being done and it doesn't solve the issue. Because again, I think that it is absolutely the earnest intention of the business owners to be controlling the odor, but I do not think it is possible based on the current filtration. And I guess the other question I would have then about that as it goes to complaints and not being detected off of the property is this enforceable in any way? And is it just about the licensing renewal? Because, you know, we write a lot of things into ordinances that there's no enforcement of.
Order's hard. Like, there have been many times where the code officer has had to go out and smell chicken waste or pig waste, and it's real. And I feel like people have different sensitivities to it. So it is hard. I believe the state also regulates odor. I don't know what kind of action they take. I mean, I think it's going to depend. It would be hard. I think it will depend how strong it is. Like, he or she could come to your property and detect it. But if it's only detectable sometimes and not consistent, or if it's really faint to you and they can't smell it, it can be tricky.
Okay. So the motion is on the floor for this particular item. We've had our public hearing to make the changes in the zoning language to allow the expansion of the growing operations and define it in the zoning districts. Ready to take a vote? All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
Note, Council Pillsbury is here, so that was 6-1. Chris. All right. Our next item, which is also a public hearing item, is item number 36-24, to consider action relative to an enactment of a proposed new ordinance, Chapter 66, around licensing cannabis establishments. Council Pillsbury, could you please read the be it ordained, and then we'll put that on the floor, and then we'll open up the public hearing.
Sure. Be it ordained that a proposed new ordinance, Chapter 66, Cannabis Establishment Licensing Ordinance, be enacted.
Second.
All right, so on the floor, and we're going to open a public hearing for any of those members of the public that wish to comment on the licensing. Please step forward. Not seeing any. Do we have anybody online?
I mean, we do, but nobody.
No, nobody's raised their hand. All right, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing. And Caroline, you have a licensing presentation?
There is no fancy licensing presentation. We're
Okay.
going to walk through the ordinance like we did at the last meeting. So an update from the last meeting. We presented licensing. You knew there was a couple tweaks that were going to be made and a couple cleanup. We kind of went through that at a high level at the ordinance committee. So you have the cleaned up version before you tonight. It hasn't substantially changed. I think as we talked about the last meeting, the key ideas with this was if we want to allow certain types of businesses in Freeport, we want to try to be as business friendly as possible and remove barriers. So when you look at other towns, keep in mind they might have this whole list of submission requirements. If we saw something that was on a list originally and we really weren't going to do anything, like a background check, which the state already does, we struck it. So you have, I think, for cannabis, a pretty streamlined ordinance. So, you know, the first page, we talked about the standard title, purpose, conflict, standard language. You have a lot of definitions here, and that's because we need to be really clear in what we're allowing for different types of cannabis uses and what we aren't allowing. And again, just like the zoning, that additional use that was mentioned tonight that the planning board didn't look at for the dispensary is not included here. So again, this kind of mirrors and works with the zoning ordinance. This is a cannabis establishment license. We have two land uses. We have cannabis cultivation and cannabis manufacturing and processing. The land use regulations don't distinguish between adult use and medical. If you're growing, you're growing. You can go from one to the other under the land use regulations. There was a provision in here as well that if you switch from one to the other, that would be okay. So you basically, it says, you know, if you're going to run a cannabis establishment in Freeport, you have to get in license, what's considered a change, what's not considered a change. The exempt caregivers, people growing in their own home, they don't need to register. If you're a caregiver growing outside of your home, again, we consider you a commercial use, and you would fall into one of the new categories and you would need to license. So we talked a little bit at the last meeting how this is set up. There's an initial application process. There is a system to give priority status to existing legally conforming businesses who are permitted to be there. So that would be category 1 for the initial application. If there's still licenses available after that, everyone else would go into a pool and the determination would be made as to who makes it to the final round of the application process. If there is multiple applications that come in for the few licenses available, there will be a lottery. As we talked about the last meeting, this language in here was tweaked to clarify that the intent is that, someone operating a cannabis establishment at a business will come in and apply for one license for the business. It's not intended for them to submit multiple. There needs to be some clear distinction. There's a list of submission requirements, which are fairly standard for their preliminary. And then if they go on to final application process, which they have a year to do, they need to show they have their licensing from the state, they need to show that they have their site plan approval, and they need to show that they're still in compliance with the conditions of this ordinance. One of the things we talked about at the last meeting was that this allows 2 different types of licensing, the cultivation license and the manufacturing and processing license, in 4 of each of those different license types. Questions, or are we?
So is it an evolution of the rules from the state and the Office of Cannabis Policy that we've heard about this dispensary cultivation license? Is that an evolution? I mean, when we started this, the prompt was, the industry is changing. I'm a medical cannabis grower now, and I need to be able to move into recreational or adult use, or whatever, however the term is defined. And now it's pivoting back towards a more specific medical cultivation. So we're playing catch up, and that's the reason why I was hesitant to make any changes, because 2 weeks from now, there could be another change. We're going to have to come back and change it again and start all over again. So that's, is there a way for us to allow, under our interpretation of how we've defined it, to sort of roll along with these evolution of terms from the state?
So I can't tell you about the evolution, but there's someone in the room and someone online that could definitely tell you. But I think what's more important is you summed up the starting point. We knew, the director from the council, we had 2 establishments that were growing as caregivers, and the understanding was that each one of these caregivers, which we thought there was 1 in each, wanted to switch to adult use. So these standards really kept that in mind, and they did look at permitting these caregivers both as home occupations or commercial uses, knowing that, at least from the medical side of caregiving, there were restrictions on the number of plants and the patients they were serving. That, as my understanding, is the big difference between that new use that was mentioned up tonight. When that came into state law and definition, I don't know, but I think because we knew that it was really focused on manufacturing, processing, and cultivation, knowing that this use with dispensing something was not of interest to the council, it wasn't even on the planning board's radar. It wasn't something. So I do feel like if that's something that people feel they need to look at, whether it be the council, feel like the planning board needs to look at that and clarifying land use and then clarifying licensing, or somebody wants to bring that forward, that would really need to be handled separately. Right. Because if they are going to have something with more patients coming on a larger scale, they might, or growing more, which again, they did allow for the adult use, but they might want to look at buffers or things like that. Right. And so then as you go through the ordinance, we talked about the ability of you guys to add conditions. If people come raise concerns, you would have a public hearing. There's a list of standard conditions of things that you would need to look at or that you can put along with it. And then there is procedures for renewal. So the renewal, with anything with a cap, you want a really clear process. And so this is designed so that 60 days before your license expires, you'll come to the town and start that renewal process. If life's busy and you forget, there's a 30-day grace period, and after that 30 days, you're out of luck and you would go back to a new application just like everybody else. So that's how this is designed. And then there is that section on inspections. It does, like a lot of things, you know, the town can have the ability to go in if there's concerns. This would require specifically the fire department and the code officer to do an inspection at least annually. That is something they have done in the past, worked together to do inspections and, you know, fire safety, life safety concerns, or if there's a concern raised that they're not complying with the municipal standard, which is not something that the state would be looking at, but, you know, a buffer or other conditions of their approval, that would give the opportunity for the code officer to review that.
Is it possible that we could have the language say, code officer and fire inspection at least annually, and that gives the opportunity, if there's a cause to go in more often, they can, but
That is what it says.
that is what it
Yep.
says. Okay.
Yep, at least annually. I mean, it starts by saying, I mean, I get the concern. It says, the police, fire, code officer, health inspector, and any other town officers authorized by the town manager, you know, could go in, but then it further clarifies that annually, the code officer and fire, at least annually, code officer and fire chief would be doing an inspection. They have a lot of things to do, so
Yeah,
I'd be
right.
shocked if they're inspecting these
More than
places
that,
every
sure.
day, but.
Yep. Okay. Dan?
I do have one procedural question, and it's sort of a long one, but I think the ultimate question short has just got a lot of setup. So in Section 8, there's an initial application. And then in Section 10, once they do a whole bunch of things, there's a final application where they submit a few things. And then it comes to us in Section 11, where the town council, after public hearing, shall determine whether the applicant complies with Section 10, basically is their application complete, I think. And upon such a determination by the council shall grant local authorization to the applicant for state licensing purposes. So I think what that means is, yes, their application's complete, they did the things that they're supposed to do, they can go ahead and apply for a state license.
No, so they would make the initial, like, preliminary application to the town. So we'd see the priority applicants that submit the basic information to show they have right title interest and some of those basic things that we want to make sure. We would then have a bunch of other applicants, maybe, come in and apply for one of these licenses. And then there would be a lottery, which would be up to the town manager or their designee. So you then would have potentially 8 people. Some people might get cut loose because if all these people come in and apply, we just wouldn't have space. They would then come in for final, they would get a notice and say, yay, you've made it, you can go on to the next round. So within a year of getting that letter that they've made it to the next round, they have a year to get their state licensing, a year to get their site plan approval, in a year just to revisit the ducks in a row they got for preliminary and make sure they have everything, and come back to you for you guys to then grant final approval.
So that final approval is, I think, 11B.
But that final approval is what they need to get their final state approval, correct? They go through the whole process at the state. We need to see that they make it through that process. But in order for the state to grant their final approval, they need to know that the municipality has given them
The
approval.
go ahead. Yeah, and they would have their full site plan approval by then too.
Right, that's,
Yeah.
yeah. So I guess the crux of the question that I have is, in 11B, it looks like there's 2 things we're granting. One is in the first couple of sentences where it says, that upon determination by the council shall grant local authorization to the applicant for state licensing purposes. And then after that, it says the council shall issue a final town license upon receipt of the following. So my question is, do we do all that on one night? And the answer is, I hope so. I mean, I hope the answer is yes. And it sounds like there's a 2-part thing. The first part, which we're kind of burdened to do as long as they meet sections 10A through C. And the second part is based on a finding by the council or designee that the application and proposed facility are in compliance. And in the ordinance, it says we can impose any conditions on a license. So it sounds like we have to do the first part. The second part is where we get to say, we'll give you a license only if you do these things.
Yeah, 'cause
I might be getting too
Sorry, I'm
weeds.
reviewing
Well,
this.
it seems like we're leading along with an implied permission for them to go forward to the state, and then they have to come back to us, and then we then suddenly have an ability to say, no, that seems like a bait and switch trap. So I think we should clarify that. I agree with that. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, and if they happen
Again,
on the
it's
same
like
night at the same
town wants to
time.
know
Yeah.
that they can get a state license, and the state wants to know that they're approved at the town level, so who goes first?
Right.
So I think that's what we need to clarify. I don't want to get into a place where we've given 4 months or 5 months of consent and approval, saying you've got everything lined up, go get your license from the state, they go get it, and they come back with it, and then all of a sudden we have lots of problems. I think that's
So
But
I
that's a
think you're
challenge.
looking at that as linear. I think C is bounding your role and responsibilities in any review, not as a linear three-step process, but a two-step process that then fully describes what your roles and responsibilities are, what you can look at, how far you can go.
But it also seems like the last check is that, have they paid their monies? They've got their state application. There isn't a whole lot we can change at that point. It's just,
I just want to make sure of that, because I don't think that's very fair at all for any business license to say, here are our criteria, you meet them, and then you can go get your state license that is a requirement of our local license. And then they come back with the state license and be like, oh, well, we actually want to see you do this, 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 and this, and this. I don't think
it
that's-
states here that it's designated application and proposal in compliance with the terms of the ordinance.
But
So I don't think you can change anything at that point unless they're not in compliance with the ordinance.
But wouldn't
Unless-
I be your designee at that point? You've approved it. And wouldn't, as part of your finding and your approval,
Or by the council or designee, that's what it says, so.
Yeah.
wouldn't you simply say, as part of your approval of all the first step pieces, and further authorize the town manager upon blah, 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 to issue the license?
Yeah, so when they come to you, for their final, they're going to have the conditional and their site plan and the other thing. And then you're going to grant okay, I think it's like Sophie signing a contract. Like you approve it, but then you do the be it further ordered, because they're going to come back with that final license.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that if we give clear direction about what the expectation is, and then send them to go get their state license, and they come back to us with the state license, that we're not changing the rules.
No.
I just want to make sure that if they come back with the state license, it's de facto, we're going to grant our permissions because they did everything they wanted to, or that we wanted them to. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It Do you would see
see language tweak there?
Yeah, I'm trying to.
It would seem that
listen in.
with any kind of order that we would issue, it would all be contained in that order, that it would be, we're approving this, granted that this and this and this happen, and then,
And upon receipt of, the
Yes.
license shall be granted.
Would-
Yeah, right, okay.
which is the same, I think, with a lot of permits too, where.
Yeah, I chase this around in my day job, dealing with the federal government and USDA housing, so I know exactly what it can be.
Would solving this is a very simple solution. Would, after adding the council, would you be comfortable adding the council or their designee shall issue the final license? Because I think you could
Yeah.
do that conditional license, and then you're going to have to say, come back when you have your final license, check, pay your fee, check. And then clearly in C, you say the finding by the council or their designee that the application and proposed facility are compliance with this ordinance, which you would have already done.
So we could do that finding and then,
Where are you adding that language?
So on 11B, 1,
Section
2,
C.
3,
Okay, yep,
the fourth sentence down where it starts with the council,
right.
I would put or their designee.
Shall issue a license.
Yep. all
Does
right.
that resolve the concern? Although I
does.
just made Sophie have the final
I almost
potentially, but
would want to see that as a separate line, so it's very visible.
you want to put that as like a new paragraph, space
Or
it
at the
down?
bottom, just, I don't know, just something to make it crystal clear that if
If they go through all the
it's
steps,
gone through it, they come back with their state, yeah.
you get a license.
yeah, either way, I would support what's here or with or without the change. I wouldn't want to pass the zoning without passing the licensing tonight. And we have a year, up to a year before anyone's going to come and deal with this, so
Right.
if we need to tweak it further, we can send it back to ordinance committee and
So-
tweak it, or if that tweak is enough, that might be
I
fine.
think that's actually another good point. You know, like we've heard some things raised today, and, you know, as people come in for licensing or read through it, they might find barriers or different things that come up, but licensing is much simpler process than amending zoning because we can do it through ordinance committee in, you know,
Okay.
2 meetings of the council.
Great. All right, we do actually also need to discuss the fees. Did we have a proposal on the fees? Is there conversation, or can we adopt the fees proposed by staff?
Is that part of this?
That was not part of this. That was inadvertently
So-
omitted from the agenda.
So,
Could we amend the be it ordered or the be it ordained to include the fee schedule?
Yep, do you want
Yes.
me to walk you through what the fee
I
schedule
have
is?
suggested language to say, to add to the be it ordained and to add the related licensing fees to the fee schedule as proposed.
Lovely.
So, Council Pillsbury, could you please add that to your be it ordained, reread the be it ordained with,
Sure. Be it ordained that a proposed new ordinance, Chapter 66, Cannabis Establishment Licensing Ordinance be enacted. Additionally, the
Related.
proposed,
related licensing fees to the fee schedule as proposed. Add the schedule.
okay. Can you say that again?
And to add the related licensing fees to the fee schedule as proposed.
And to add the related licensing fee schedule as proposed.
Second.
Thank you. Sorry to butcher that, but I just want to get that in there so we can adopt this. All right, any more discussion on the fees and/or the licensing action?
Is there any more background on the fees, why they are the way they are?
well, yes. Do you have the sticky notes, or do I?
I do.
Okay. Because they actually come from actual cost.
Does it cover the 4 years' worth of time and legal fees it took us to get this
So,
to where we are?
just to, I guess
Oh,
that
do you
was
want me-
more like who was going to do
Oh,
it.
that
But
was more like Caroline, get your notes ready.
our,
Got it.
our best estimate is that this cost us approximately $20,000 between legal fees and staff time, probably more. I'm sorry, 24,000, probably more. We will be able to submit for reimbursement for the time and energy on adult use. So when we do the math, we think what is left that we're not going to get reimbursed for is about $12,000. So we also think we have 8 licenses. Each applicant is going to have to put an incredible investment into that. So we really feel like the likelihood that we're going to have churn on licenses is pretty low. So we took that 12,000 divided by 8, came up with 1,500, which was where we got the final application fee from. The preliminary application fee, we added up the cost of legal ads, department head review, processing by the town clerk's office, which I will tell you is very similar to we came up with those very same numbers on a renewal. So what we said was the preliminary application fee was the 500, the final fee was the 1,500 to get the back costs. Renewal fee would be the 500 because that's what we see. Now, as the cost of publishing public hearing notices goes up and staff time costs goes up, we would see that change, but it should change throughout the fee schedule. The late fee was a little bit harder to quantify, but we thought about Chris's time with having to deal with people calling about it, chasing people, that kind of thing. Plus, we really want people to apply within the time frame. We felt like that was a reasonable way to, it's a fee that they can avoid if they do they should be applying 90 days before we get, or 60 days before we get to that period. And my assumption is, like all the other licenses, they will get notification that their license is expiring. But you will also grant these licenses to align with the state license, so it shouldn't be a shock.
My only concern is that I don't think that we'll get 8 license applications. I think maybe we'll get 4. And if we don't get 8, we're basically asking the rest of the town to subsidize the $12,000 that we're not going to get reimbursed for. A version of a conversation we had a couple of weeks ago about other fees. So I would be in support of raising the final application fee.
So, there's nothing here that says you can't do that. We just need to have your rationale on the record in case we're ever asked. I'm trying to take I tried to use the last conversation to drive how I approach this, so I'll get it dialed in pretty soon.
Want to make an amendment to the fee schedule, Dan?
If there's support, I don't want to waste time, but.
I think there's support. I think this is quite different than the last conversation we had about fees, because this is about a very profitable industry, as we just heard, in terms of how much money they're generating for the economy. So I don't think asking a commercial venture to pay for fees that cover cover municipal staff time that we're expending for the purposes of that industry is uncalled for.
Would this application fee, final application fee, potentially go down if we did get 8, or maybe not this year or next year? If we raise it, would we then consider lowering it?
This fee is for the initial work we've done, the 20,000 minus what we get to do that. So we have 8 licenses. You're saying you don't think we'll get it. I don't know that we will or we won't, but we have it, and eventually I think we will have 8 people that come in to do this, and that will go up over time, I'm sure.
I think
That's my thought, that because it's 8 licenses, that's tied to that initial license.
staff time is hard to track. We have a lot of hours into this in meetings and into the days, and so I think the number we came up with, I feel like, is pretty cautious. A lot of it is going to be legal expenses, and I don't feel like we're done talking about cannabis. I believe there's some additional amendments out there now, so I think we're going to continue to have, as we get a lot of these changes in state law, unfortunately, it is costing us more in legal expenses, and so I think we are most likely going to be able to justify them in the future as we try to keep up with changing rules and regulations.
Daryl?
Not high enough, you ought to be 2,500. That's my opinion.
But you still want to hold moorings at $15 though, right?
Total different.
All right. I won't go there. I won't go there. But, yeah. Go ahead.
See, I'm not going to weigh in on what I think we need to set for this fee versus another, but I think this conversation is indicative that we have to have a rational and justifiable methodology for setting all fees across the board, and it would serve us well to set how we're going to do that and just consistently follow it, whether or not we feel emotional or passionate about one fee versus another. And I think in this case, the argument that was put forth by the manager and the planner makes sense to me. I think we could sit here and debate whether or not we're going to get 8 licenses in 1 year, 5 years, whatever it is. We just need, and we owe it to the town to have a transparent and well thought through methodology for our fee schedules. And that applies, in my mind, to every fee that we set.
Joanna?
I think you said it perfectly. I really appreciate the effort to make this data backed as much as we possibly can with a lot of assumptions we just don't know. And I think that was, when I requested data for the last fee, that was what I was trying to get at, is we should be making these decisions based on data, facts, as much as we possibly can. So
So I just want to give you some background and maybe help you make your decision that you need to make. So although we looked at this from a data perspective and what the actual costs were, we did look at a sampling of 4 other municipalities, and you're falling right in the middle. So everyone does their structure, their fee structure is a little bit different. Some of them go off tiers because under state licensing, you get tiers based upon the areas. So we looked at Scarborough, Wyndham, Brunswick, and South Portland. And so it's cheaper to go to Brunswick and South Portland, like less than $1,000 for either of these 2 uses. But in towns that regulate by plant canopy size, you can be upward of $7,500 to $10,000. So I do feel we came in with some justified costs based upon numbers, which we do think are conservative. But at the end of the day, you are really falling kind of right in the middle from our small sampling of neighboring communities. And, so if, like Gorham, for example, for their cultivation, they also, I would say, kind of fall in the middle between, they go by size, but between 1,000 and 5,000. So there is a range out there, and I feel comfortable that
Okay.
you're.
Thanks, Caroline.
One last question here. Much like the conversation we had last time, is there a possibility that if we do see our expenses around this increase significantly, we can adjust the fee schedule?
We can always adjust the fee schedule. Yep.
So I'll propose an amendment to the fee schedule to increase the final application fee to $2,500.
Second.
All right, so we're going to vote on the amendment first before we vote on the fee schedule as it's attached to the be it ordained. All those in favor of amending the fee schedule to adjust the final application fee to $2,500? That's 3. All opposed? And that's 4. Motion fails.
So the 3, just for Chris, she couldn't, I don't think she's.
Fournier, Smith, and Pilch.
All right, so with the proposed as printed fee schedule, we have it moved and seconded to adopt the change to Chapter 66 of our licensing ordinance to include associated businesses in the cannabis industry as presented and discussed. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? 7-0. Great. Thank you for a robust discussion. Our next item is item number 37-24, to consider action relative to setting a public hearing in 3 weeks regarding a special amusement permit. Councilor Benoit, could you please read the be it ordered?
Skip right over me.
Be it ordered that a public hearing be set for February 27th, 2024 at the Town Council meeting starting at 6 p.m. in Freeport Council Chambers, 30 Main Street, regarding a new special permit for the following: Linda Bean's Main Kitchen and Topside Tavern, 88 Main Street.
Second.
All right, so we're setting a public hearing. We have had some information in our packet, which is an application. I believe they're adding music. I think that's the reason for the special amusement permit, since the business serves alcohol. Any questions? We're just setting the public hearing, so we'll have a lot of information available at the public hearing itself and that evening. All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, public hearing is set for the 27th. Our next item is item 38-24, to set a public hearing regarding amendments to Chapter 2, the Administrative Code, Section 510-1, designating a department head as the Director of Public Works. Sophie, you want to give us just a very brief comment on this before we vote to set the public hearing?
Yep, I am just looking to, sorry. We're just looking to clarify that the Public Works Director runs the Public Works Department. And then later, we can talk about who to appoint to that position. I have a recommendation. But right now, we have a consolidated position that is creating some confusion within staff and the community.
All right, and staff personnel changes needs a public hearing? Because it's in...
This is in the administrative code, which is a larger discussion I hope to have with the ordinance committee because the administrative code is very cumbersome and I think gets to a level of detail that has been described to me by counselors as not being the level of detail they believe is council role. So,
Yeah. Curious about that. All right, Daryl.
As a former department head, we need to clean that up and take the political aspects away from the council on people that are filling the roles of department head. So we're heading in the right direction. Thank you.
Okay, Councilor Lawrence, could you please read the beat order?
Love to.
Sorry,
I felt missed. Be it ordered that a public hearing be set for February 27th, 2024 at the Town Council meeting, starting at 6 p.m. in Freeport Council Chambers, 30 Main Street, regarding amendments to Chapter 2, Administrative Code, Section 510.1, to designate the department head as the Director of Public Works.
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. We're setting a public hearing. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. Next item is item number 39-24, to consider action relative to setting a public hearing on a liquor license for Kendall Tavern. Councilor Smith, could you please read?
Whoever had the one.
I was going to do something.
Be it ordered that a public hearing be set for February 27th, 2024 at the Town Council meeting starting at 6 p.m. in the Freeport Council Chambers, 30 Main Street, regarding a new liquor license for the Kendall Tavern located at 213 Main Street, Freeport.
Second.
All right, we're setting this public hearing for a new liquor license. Does it say new? It does say new, doesn't it? Yeah, new. New liquor license. So we'll have a full explanation of that, but in between now and then, we have the application in our packets to read, to get any details about that pending. That will be the third public hearing that we'll have at our next meeting on the 27th. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries.
Luckily, they're not too
Our next item is item number 40-24, to consider action relative to use of town property by Meeting House Arts. Councilor Pilch, could you please read the beat order?
Sure. Be it ordered that the use of town property request by Meeting House Arts for music in the park at Memorial Park on the following dates: June 1st, July 6th, August 3rd, and 25th, September 7th, and 27th be approved.
Second.
All right, so this is a series of dates. We have a process for anybody who wants to reserve time using Memorial Park. It's a public property. The clerk handles the reservations. So this is not an exclusive use by any single group. This is a permission for groups to come in and propose public activities. Meeting House Arts has been running concerts there for several years now and proposing a slightly expanded schedule. And if we have questions, Suzanne Watson from Meeting House Arts is here to answer any of those. Chip?
I don't have a question for you. It's a question of, why is this coming to the town council? I mean, if it's, this seems like something that the town manager or the clerk could handle. Why is it coming to us? Because
In the past, I'll take a first crack at that, but in the past, this language is for any public use of property, not just Memorial Park. And so there was concern that permits were being issued to this group or that group for uses of public spaces, and maybe there wasn't as much coordination or information shared. So I think that's why it comes to the council now for a specific use of public property by permit. There's no fee, and it's just a first come, first serve for the reservation of the dates, but.
right, but the question is, why is that coming to
Yeah.
us? I mean, is it?
so, because it's policy, whether written or,
Can we change that, I guess? is
well,
what-
I would say that I'm going to ask the ordinance committee to look at a council policy that I hope will come forward for adoption. And we could add this to that list of policies that as long as there's a procedure that's written down,
Yeah.
where council is being very clear about what they expect, I think that that's fine. But I would say this is one of many. So bear with me, and we can talk about the priority of what we talk about.
Okay.
Not long ago, we renewed the permit for the Hilton Garden Inn to use Memorial Park on various bases. And I guess one thing I would just say in terms of that consideration is obviously that's a commercial use of public property. This is a nonprofit use of public property, and sort of making sure that there's equal access to all of that would be the concern in any policy going forward.
Yeah, but it's really first come, first serve. I mean, we don't say, nope, sorry, you can't. That's all. I mean, I get it if we're in a really heavy political environment and we have everything going on, I understand that, but that could be, those kind of things could come to us, but this is pretty non-political, I would think. Well, maybe if Bob Dylan's coming down, but.
So we have a representative of Meeting House Arts here. There's no purpose for you to come, but if you'd like to share something, Suzanne, I think we're pretty comfortable with the action, but I don't want to deny you the opportunity to inform
You
us
sat
about
here
what's
this
happening.
long, so you might as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Suzanne Watson, 21 Carriage Road, here on behalf of Meeting House Arts. Hey, this is the third year we've been doing this. We're getting a little better at it each year. And this year, John Albright, who I hope is listening in at this point, but John has been wonderful. John Egan has been sound person. Derek Ebert has been part of this too. You all know the age-old issue we have with lack of air conditioning. So this is our way. Not only do we get to continue music through the summer in an outdoor setting, but we bring more of a public art or public community participation as well. So I think it's just a no-brainer in my mind. But I'd also say I have 3 cards here from Hilton, and I have talked with at least 3 different people in the last week to make sure we're in no conflict with them, that they will help us with whatever we need. They're supplying electricity, they're doing, helping with parking, a lot of other things. But we also have and I'm going to take the opportunity to say, the U.S. Navy Country Current Band has asked for the opportunity to play in Freeport. They came to us and asked if they could perform, and Memorial Park is just the perfect place. So we're going to do that the 25th of August, that Sunday, 25th of August. And I'm going to solicit some help from the town, because I would love to make this a veterans recognition. And I think there's actually a formal process with that. But it'd be great if we could look to bring in the vets and have a actual recognition Vets Day there with the Navy Band. So thank you for your time.
Thanks, Suzanne. Great idea. All right, any other comments or questions before we take action? All right, it's been moved and second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? 7-0. Great. Our last action item is item number 41-24, to consider action relative to confirming an appropriation of $35,000 in ARPA funds for Phase 2 of the Electrify Everything program. Back to Matt. Councilor Pillsbury, could you please read the be it ordered?
Sure. Be it ordered that the appropriation of $35,000 in ARPA funds for Phase 2 of the Electrify Everything program be approved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. We've had a couple of conversations about this previously, and now it's an action item. Sophie, anything to add on?
Yep, I just, I want to add that we weren't 100% sure if it had to come back to council, which is why we're bringing it back, rather be safe than sorry. But we currently have exhausted the initial $40,000. We have $2,511.49 worth of applications that are pending, waiting for your action tonight. There has been, I think councilors may have received some correspondence from Bob Stevens about the concern that when the Freeport stood up this program, which predates me, but we did it, it was done in accordance with the town's regular purchasing policy, which does not allow funds to be expended prior to proof on, and on first come, first serve for this, we needed to, it was a reimbursement setup, which follows the way we expend funds. There's been an inquiry, but not a full application made by Freeport Housing Trust that would actually utilize the rest of the money, so $40,000. And there is I think a concern has been raised that we should encumber the money, although the application isn't complete and the equipment hasn't been purchased. And I just want you to be aware of that. I think staff is looking for a little bit of guidance if you would like us to change. Nothing if you would not like us to change. But we are still getting inquiries from individual residents about this program.
So this appropriation would be to authorize, go ahead with the Freeport Housing Trust application?
So
This would fund the second half of what we
This funds the
pledged.
second half.
Okay.
And then I guess what I would be looking for would be just some informal guidance, given Bob's concerns, which you all did get. I didn't get an email.
I didn't get it, no.
So I'm sorry, our finance director, who said, I usually only come to the council 8 times a year, and that's budget season, is now in front of the council.
Hi. So, yeah, I received an application from Freeport Housing Trust and have been working with Matt in trying to complete the application. I have the majority of it. There's a little bit of discrepancy on his application or question on my behalf of his application on the amount he's actually asking for. Because the way the application is structured, it asks you to put the reimbursement amount, and he wrote $2,000, but the efficiency main letter that he provided said he's getting a lot more than that. I don't want to say things I'm not supposed to up here. So my concern and my understanding with the Freeport Housing Trust is that they would be looking for multiple units to put into this project, whatever he's developing or renovating or whatever the case may be. And so Matt had asked me if I could hold funds for him, because I asked him for a receipt of the purchase of the unit so that I would know what he was actually asking for. And at the time I told him no, that I can't hold funds. I still had applications coming in, and just mentioned that I did not feel that I could hold funds for items that had not been purchased yet. And Mr. Stevens did come in to inform me that that is not the intent when he generated the application or presented this process, that he felt funds could be encumbered for people if they were wanting to do this work. He presented me with an email that went back to some discussions that were done before council, and a letter he had provided at whatever point through the process, that there was some concern on council's behalf that residents may be in a position where they cannot afford to do this efficiency measure. And so what could be done if they couldn't afford to do this efficiency measure but wanted to take advantage of the grant and actually get it done. And he did provide me that between the efficiency main letter as well as he felt the town or somebody could generate a letter on town letterhead that would essentially tell the contractor, we will pay you for this if you can do the work. So that's kind of the little bit of the backstory with it. So I'm looking for guidance from council because essentially if I do this, I'm telling individual residents that there is no more funding for this program. That's my guess, that Housing Trust is going to be asking for enough units for me to basically tie up the rest of the funding for the program.
So, given the fact that we were not intimately involved in the discussions and the intent of council, we wanted to give you an opportunity to change us. We have already made a decision. I just want to make this clear. We already made the decision that we would not encumber funds, that we were going to hold this application to the same standard as everybody else. But if we have it wrong, and we're not following the intent of council, we want you to be able to tell us. And I'm bringing it up simply because my other avenues to get information, I thought that he had copied you on the email.
And where does the 35,000 fit into that? Or is that a totally separate channel?
So we are talking about the 35,000 funding phase 2. If we follow through with what we had planned to do before Bob expressed his concern, we would have $32,000 left
For the general public to
for the
come in.
general
Yeah,
public.
yeah. Okay.
If not, we will
We'll
expend.
use it all.
Yep.
If we reserve funds for the Freeport Housing Trust plan. Were those, do we know if not that this makes a whole lot of difference, but was the FHT going into one project, or were they spreading it around, or?
I did not get any detail on the project itself. The efficiency main letter was of significant value. I would assume it's a multi-unit project, but I am not sure.
Yeah, Matt?
Thank you. I've actually received some calls, some letters. I think we all got some letters. I have some very concerns with what's proposed here tonight. What was sold to us when we started this program at the first meeting was we're going to try to put some insulation and possibly heat pumps and some low to moderate income in our residents in Freeport. And he sold me on it. I wasn't initially in favor of it. They sold me on it. Then the program had some creep. Then we're funding electric lawnmowers, electric chainsaws, leaf blowers, and electric bikes, which I totally disagree with. I don't think these funds should be funding those for the town of Freeport. And now, the proposal I'm hearing coming forward, I've got some major concerns. I support Freeport Housing Trust, but this money was supposed to be for residents for payback over a period of time. We are going down a road that I can't support, and until we bring this program back to, in my opinion, where it was originally for installation of heat pumps for our residents, I think we ought to end it. So I think we've got a tough decision here, because what we started out to do and where we are here today is 180 degrees.
Matt?
Do you have a timeline on when Freeport Housing Trust can wrap this up?
No, I do not.
Do they understand there's a potential sense of urgency?
I have not had any conversations to the such with Mr. Peters.
Okay. Because this was like the aim of the program, and I do believe that Freeport Housing Trust utilizing this grant process to put heat pumps into units is an excellent use of the money, because the pass-through will go to the residents of those units to keep their cost of rent down and their utility costs down. So I'm supportive of it. It would be great if they could sort of pull this together, but I'm also not in favor of holding it for an if and when situation.
So there are two things that play with that, and I would have to look at the letter again. Most of the efficiency main letters that I have received through this process usually are good for a year. So if I'm going off of that, he probably has a year to qualify for the efficiency main contribution, okay? The second part of that is he would only have until 2025 to ask for these funds, for me to be able to expend them, because it's ARPA money. And ARPA money has to be spent by October of 2025. If it remains unspent by that time, we have to return it to the federal government. So I would not recommend giving him to the 11th hour to get it done, because I would want to give council an opportunity to reallocate those funds to a means to support general governmental operations.
Do you know, can you remind us what our unobligated balance is?
58,000.
Yep, 58,000, just over 58,000.
$36.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Chip? Yeah, I agree with Daryl. The creep has gotten out. We're subsidizing things for that people potentially making $93,400. That's the average income of this town. I have an issue with that. I think it's a good program, but I think it should be funded not by public dollars of taxes, but by donations from individual people, because it doesn't give us enough bang for the buck. Spend $30,000 to put a heat pump in that helps a family or an individual that has a house there that's five people. That's not what we should be spending public money on. It should be a bigger purpose. As far as the housing trust goes, they already have a TIF. They're already getting a lot of funding from that. So this is more money going to them for, I'm not against helping these people, but it's another avenue that kind of sidetracks what we've been doing in the past. So I was against it in the beginning. I still am. I don't like it as a public funded program.
John? Sorry, I just would like to interject to clarify language. Taxpayer dollars are not funding this program. It is ARPA funds. Not to say that at some point, if it chooses to continue or whatever council decides that it can't get there, but currently, taxpayer dollars are not funding the program. It is from ARPA funding.
Right, but that's income taxes. It's not it's town taxes.
Yep, and it's not to say that these ARPA funds couldn't have been allocated to reduce taxpayer impact, right? So I just wanted to kind of clarify some of that, because I think there's some distinct differences there for it.
It is federal tax money. And I just read a report where my grandkids are going to be looking at $1 million debt on the spending that we're going to now, so.
And that's a
it isn't
bigger
free
discussion
money.
than me at this podium. That's what I hear you.
It isn't free money, and so.
Yes.
And I'm just saying.
I was not suggesting it's free money. It's not from Freeport taxpayers, yes.
But it is public funds, and that's where
Yep.
my issue is.
So I guess I'm still confused about how it is we moved from, my understanding, and again, the program predates me, and I appreciate the fact that initially this was focused on home heating efficiency, particularly around heat pumps and other energy efficiency things, and then moved into this other electrical reimbursement program for electric equipment. But all of those things I understood to have this income threshold. And I'm confused as to how it is that Freeport Housing Trust as an organization would fit into that same thing. I understand that the people living in those units probably fit into that. I just don't understand how they, as an institution, are coming through this program.
Sure. I will let council speak to how the program evolved, because despite verifying the process, I was not at the council meetings where those decisions were made. But on the application itself, there is a place for you to choose whether you are a homestead or whether you are a rental unit, or like a housing complex. And that what you have to agree to on the application. And again, this is all self-verification, mind you. And not to say one way or another, just letting you know, I don't get information that verifies this stuff. If you check the box for being a housing unit, you have to agree to pass this rebate and savings along to your tenants through the form of rent reduction for a period of time. But again, I don't get updates, I don't get quarterly reports that would tell me one way or the other that my rent would have been this versus that it's a self-verification process.
Could residents of the housing trust apply for this rebate program? And like people who are actually living in the...
If they had I don't know what their rental contract is,
Yeah.
if they had the ability to make structural changes to the units, possibly, but I don't know that. They're going to pay for something that they can't take with them, yeah.
So I think we have two things we're looking at here. One is to
Yeah.
move the balance of the funds in so that current applications, which we have some in front of us right now, can actually be addressed. And I think, and maybe we're ready to say no altogether, but I think there's enough ambiguity here about whether or not there's any ability to sort of hold off or reserve portions of this funding for Freeport Housing Trust, to where we could move that off to the side and get some more information from Sophie and the team to come back before we make any vote on that. I'm in agreement with Daryl and Chip that the reservation of the funds for a particular entity when those applications aren't in place yet, while we have current residents who are applying and would then be told there's no money, that doesn't seem right at all to me. So I think I'm not in favor of that. But I also am a former board member of the trust, and I work with Matt in my day job, so I might have to recuse myself from a vote if we get to that. But let's at least get going on the item here, which is to release the second chunk of money so that the program can continue to roll forward with its success, and those pending applications can be considered. So we've had the motion read and seconded, and all we're voting on right now is to release the second half of the pledge that we made a year ago or 10 months ago, whenever it was when we first started Electrify Everything, to make the final $35,000 available, and have the program continue to function as it has to this date, which is applications come in from an individual with a representation of the reimbursement request. So we're not changing that at all. All right.
And I would clarify that had Matt had a receipt for 20 units, it would have processed through without coming to council at all, assuming these funds had already been allocated. If he hands me a receipt tomorrow, he qualifies the way the program is. So I just want to be clear about that if you're allowing me to continue to operate as I have since May of 2023 for this, if I get a receipt from him that says this is going to do 10 units and I've paid for 10 units, here you go, I would cut a check for that amount of money.
So I would suggest or recommend that we not quite go down that road, but instead what I heard from council was a desire for some further discussion around the program. So I would suggest that if this passes, we would fund the 3 applications that are remaining at a little over $2,500, and we just pause any expenses and come back to council with at least a better definition of the problem and some questions, because we might need to tweak the program again, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm not particularly opposed to a renter having an arrangement with their landlord and getting a benefit to lower their energy costs and get off fossil fuel. But I'm not in favor of a landlord going out and pledging because they have the ability to write a $40,000 check or a $60,000 check and saying, I'm going to take all the grant money and I'll tell you how I'm going to spend it later. I'm not in favor of that at all.
I'd rather see us pay the $2,500 that have already been put in
Yep.
and take a hard look at this program and focus us back to what we originally had. I had calls of people that wanted that, and I think we're leaving them short. So that's what I would like to see happen,
Yeah.
because it's kind of got out of control, in my opinion.
So I think we'll take that advice from the manager and fund the pending applications that are sitting right in front of us now from individual residents. We'll release this fund so that they can process those, and then,
Can we release $2,500 instead of the whole 35?
well, it may just be an updated action item, an updated information item, and we'll have already taken the action by the funds here. But
So this is where I'm going to ask for some trust, because it's going to be a whole lot easier for Jessica's multi-page reporting document to not have to, if this is the max, let's put the max in. It's on tape that we're not going to be doing. I don't have permission to spend more than the pending applications. And we'll bring it back. And once we know people are comfortable, we'll move forward. Or at least a majority of people are comfortable. We'll move forward.
So not to throw another wrinkle into this, but we could deliberate this for a while. It may not be clear as to the timing to the public. Should we continue to receive applications that are complete and just file those? Because otherwise, we're arbitrarily then, somebody could be ready tomorrow and Jessica could say, well, no, you can't submit an application right now. And then 3 weeks later or 2 months later, we get our act together and we figure this out. And then someone else is ahead of that. If someone's already working under the assumption that there's money in a program from the town,
Yeah.
we can't just turn the faucet off.
Yeah, I think Jessica's really good at communicating with people. And we can do that. That makes a lot of sense.
I also think that's important too for gathering sort of the demand for the program. So we could revisit that as we think about the program moving forward. So.
I'm comfortable with the action to authorize the second 35, or the final $35,000, knowing that it's not going to go to a single entity that's going to reserve most of it or all of it, and we can continue to process apps that come in.
But what if Freeport Housing Trust does submit receipts tomorrow? To me, that the intention of the program originally was to benefit, like the use of ARPA money is to help those people that were most affected by the pandemic, and those are our lower income folks, and this speaks directly to that, in my opinion. So we can have that debate, but I'm just saying, if Freeport Housing Trust does come in tomorrow with receipts, I think that that's a valid application and they should hold their place in the queue while we sort this out.
I think what we would do is communicate with everybody that council intends to kind of follow through on a program, that we have authority to expend $2,500, to fund applications that have been received as of February 6th, right? We're on the 6th. And also that one of the things that council might be doing is looking at the eligibility elements of the program. So you can submit whatever request you want, and we'll filter it through council's decision on eligibility moving forward, keeping you in line.
I'm feeling a little guilty as I stand here, because I had a phone call last Thursday, and a lady wanted to put in an application, and I said, I don't know if I have money for you yet, because I didn't know what this decision was going to be. If it was going to be to give it to Housing Trust, I would have no money. And she said, well, can you call me when a decision is made and tell me whether or not I can submit my application? And I said, I can either call you or you can call me Wednesday morning and I'll tell you whether or not to submit your application. So I am feeling guilty that there is one application that I know of out there that I asked to hold because I didn't know what I would have available. So I guess I'm asking, thank you for the 2,500, but can you please increase it by an unknown number for that one application of the lady that I need to call and tell her that it would be okay?
I think we had pledged this additional $35,000. I think we should approve the additional $35,000. If it doesn't get spent, we can always reallocate it like we're going to do with any other ARPA money that hasn't been spent. I don't want to second guess the decision that Sophie and Jessica had provisionally made. I don't think that's our place. I'm uncomfortable with holding things, so well, let's see who applies, and then the council will maybe approve it, maybe not approve it. I think we set the policy for the program, and then we let the program be administered by the people we're paying to administer the program and trust their decisions, so that you don't have all these awkward situations about, well, you can, but maybe not, but hold it. And so if people have applied, if they're seeking reimbursement, whether it's Freeport Housing Trust, which is clearly a beneficiary of the program as it was originally designed, we can debate whether that was the right decision or not, but that's how we designed it and passed it. So that's what I would say. As written, I think it's fine. I wouldn't encumber Sophie or Jessica any further.
I agree with that.
I still think the program, we need to look at this program. I help the people we've already pledged to is fine, and the one person that we have is fine. But we changed the program halfway through, and it was because they weren't getting any applications. So I think we really need to relook at this, because I was under the impression it was helping people that are less fortunate. I don't think someone making 90, which is the mean income, which we raised the limit to subsidize people that can get it. We raised it to the median income of Freeport, and I don't think that's right.
I can't think of anybody more deserving than people who are living in the housing units that Freeport Housing Trust rents to them. And if this helps them with their rent, I think it's exactly who I would want this program to go to.
Yeah, and I trust the housing trust, and I'm also thinking about what John said of, making sure that there is some guarantee that tenants are the beneficiaries in some way. So.
But it's not about the housing trust. I mean, it's about the individual people in the town that are paying for this. We already subsidize the housing trust.
But they're residents of the town. They are.
I get that. I understand that. But we already subsidize the housing trust, which is helping them out. So we need to spread it out a little more if that's what we're going to do. It's my feelings. If we're going to do this, like I said before, it should be a privately funded program. But
It's funny, I hear the discussion saying we want to help people with heat. Well, yeah, we're buying electric chainsaws, we're buying electric bikes, we're buying leaf blowers. I can't support that. That's not where we started out. And if we're going to continue with this valuable program, whether it's with Freeport Housing Trust or whatever, let's get back to where we truly wanted it. So unless we're going to look at the program and get the program rewritten and go back to what I was originally sold on, I'm going to vote no.
So to get some action here, the motion is to release the, authorize the final $35,000 and expect some update from staff at our next meeting about how that's going, and that there is no reservation of funds for somebody's pending application, that we're going to continue with applications that come in front of us, and as the money is there, then they're dealt with. Which is largely what's been read and seconded. So I think we're ready to vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
One more time, I got to count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those against?
Aye.
5-2.
For your just information to let you know, of the 37 payments that have gone out, 21 of them have been for heat pumps or insulation. So just to kind of give you some perspective of what's being.
What were the others for?
Well, I'm sorry?
What were the others for? The other 16?
It was the remaining amount, it's really a variety. I was gonna add them up, but it was kind of a lot. There's a few bikes, there's a couple electric vehicles, leaf blowers, mowers. So that's kind of a good variety between the remaining number.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Okay, thanks, Jessica.
Of course. Have a great evening.
All right, so you can see that there's a couple of items tabled, and I believe those are going to remain tabled. Our last item before executive session is to have public comment from those online. I don't see any hands up. I don't see any members there besides the press, so that concludes our agenda, and we'll take a motion to go into executive session. Please, let's see, we got to read that, and we are at Councilor Fornew. Could you please read 4224?
Motion that the town council enter executive session.
Second.
I think you got to cite the whole thing.
Yeah, we got to, state law requires the recitation, Daryl, sorry.
Oh, thank you. To consider action relative to an executive session pursuant to 1 MRSA 405 6D pending a collective bargaining with the Teamsters Local Union 340.
Second.
Great, all right, so we are now in executive session, and we will cancel the public broadcast and the recording.